Claude responded. Most men think the worst call they'll ever get is from a doctor. Most men think the worst call they'll ever get is from a doctor. Mine came from a locksmith standing in my own garage, and by the time I hung up the phone, I already understood that the man I'd been for 31 years of marriage was about to become someone else entirely. My name is Walter Adkins. I'm 64 years old. I spent 36 years installing commercial refrigeration systems before I retired, and I've spent every one of the 11 years since coaching Little League on Wednesday nights at Kessler Park in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Until 9 days ago, I thought I understood my life completely. I thought I'd earned the quiet part, the part where nothing else was supposed to happen to me. Before I get into it, friend, do me a favor. If you're the kind of person who sticks around for the whole story, hit subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it means something to an old man sitting in front of a microphone at midnight. Like the video too, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my position, because I still don't know if I did the right thing. Let's get into it. My wife's name is Marilyn Adkins, 31 years married, 34 together. She teaches watercolor classes at the community center on Tuesdays. She reads 2 mystery novels a week, and she takes her tea black with a slice of lemon, never sugar. She alphabetizes the spice rack. She cries during dog food commercials. I knew this woman. I would have sworn to it in front of God and a jury. Or at least, I thought I did. This started on a Thursday in September, the kind of Oklahoma afternoon where the heat still hasn't gotten the memo that summer's supposed to be over. Marilyn had flown out to Sacramento 4 days earlier to help her sister Pam pack up a house after a divorce. I was home alone, eating leftover meatloaf, standing up at the counter like a man with no supervision, which, I suppose, I was. That's when I noticed the garage door wouldn't open, not stuck, not jammed, dead. The keypad lit up fine, the remote clicked, but nothing moved, like the whole mechanism had simply decided to stop existing. I've fixed enough compressors and motors in my life to know the difference between broken and disconnected, and this felt disconnected on purpose. I called Higgins Garage Door and Overhead Service, the outfit that put the door in 8 years back. A young guy named Marcus showed up within the hour, toolbox in one hand, energy drink in the other, the kind of kid who calls you sir without meaning anything by it. "Give me 15 minutes, he said, heading into the garage. I gave him 15 minutes. I went back to my meatloaf. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, who was standing not 30 feet from me. "Mr. Adkins, there's a hatch cut into your garage ceiling behind the storage racks. It's got a padlock on it from underneath. You know anything about that?" I actually laughed, friend, out loud, alone in my kitchen, like a crazy person. I typed back, "Marcus, we don't have any hatch up there. That's just crawl space insulation." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Sir, I'm looking right at it, and there's fresh sawdust on the floor under it. This wasn't cut 8 years ago. This is new, fresh sawdust." I stood there holding my phone, and something in my chest went very still, the way a room goes still right before a storm rolls through. I walked into that garage and found Marcus standing on a stepladder, flashlight in hand, staring up at a square cut cleanly into the drywall ceiling, tucked behind the very shelving unit Marilyn had insisted we keep bolted to the wall 2 summers ago when I wanted to replace it with something better. A hatch. Padlocked from below, which meant somebody wanted it sealed from our side, not the other way around. I climbed up next to Marcus, and that's when I heard it. Not breathing. Worse, somehow. A slow, deliberate scratching, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across insulation, over and over, patient as a clock. "Call somebody," Marcus said, already backing down the ladder. I called 911 before I'd even finished thinking the sentence through. 2 Tulsa PD officers arrived in under 10 minutes. I stood in my own garage, in the house I'd lived in for 22 years, feeling like a stranger had rearranged my furniture while I slept. They pried the hatch open with a crowbar, and I braced myself for something out of a nightmare. Instead, there was nothing. A crawl space, maybe 4 feet high, insulation pulled back in one corner, and sitting right in that corner, a small battery-powered speaker, warm to the touch, and next to it, a prepaid flip phone with a spider-webbed crack across the screen, propped against a roll of duct tape like somebody had set a stage. The scratching had been a loop, recorded, timed, remotely triggered. The younger officer, a kid named Reyes, who looked like he'd graduated the academy on a Tuesday, turned the flip phone over in gloved hands. "This got activated recently," he said. "Battery's still warm. Somebody triggered this in the last hour, maybe less." "While Marcus was standing right here," I said. "Looks that way, sir. I need you to sit with me in that moment, because that's when the ground actually tilted under me, even though I hadn't moved an inch. Somebody had known exactly when a repairman would be standing at that ladder. Somebody had waited, then pressed a button, timed to make a 24-year-old garage door technician text a homeowner in alarm, timed to make that homeowner call the police, timed to put two officers crouched in my crawl space at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. This wasn't random. This was a performance, and somebody had written the whole script before I ever picked up the phone. They found the storage unit 2 days later. I don't know the precise hour it happened, the hour I stopped being a confused homeowner and became a person. Police officers looked at differently, but it happened the way these things always happen, quietly, politely, without anybody announcing it. One afternoon, a detective named Rhonda Pruitt was sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, notepad open, asking if I'd ever rented a storage unit off 71st Street. I told her no. According to the paperwork, I had, 3 times, actually, paid in cash, my signature on every agreement. When they opened Unit 212, they found a woman's suitcase, a prepaid debit card and an account carrying my name, and a photograph. A woman, maybe 40, sandy hair, laughing at whoever held the camera, with absolutely no idea her photograph would end up in a police evidence bag. "Mr. Adkins," Detective Pruitt said, studying my face the way you'd study a hand of cards you didn't trust. "This woman's been reported missing for 9 days. Her name is Karen Voss. You know her?" "No," I said. "Never seen her before in my life." That was true. Completely true. But here's the part I didn't tell Detective Pruitt that afternoon, the part that split something open in my chest that I had to sit alone with before I could say it out loud to anyone. When I got home, I walked straight upstairs to Marilyn's side of the closet, to the shoebox on the top shelf where she keeps old photographs she says she means to organize someday. I pulled it down and went through every envelope, and there, tucked behind a stack of our wedding pictures, was Karen Voss, smiling in a photograph that had clearly been printed at a drugstore kiosk, hidden in plain sight in my own bedroom. I sat down on the edge of our bed, the same bed we'd shared for 31 years, in a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to somebody I'd never met, holding proof that my wife had been keeping a missing woman's face in a shoebox above our heads while we slept. I thought about all 34 years. Every anniversary dinner, every Sunday morning she read her mystery novels with her black tea and lemon while I did the crossword across the table from her, completely at ease. How long had Karen Voss been in that shoebox? How long had Marilyn been building whatever this was? At 64, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a man my age was his knees giving out or his heart doing something it shouldn't. Turns out the worst thing is finding out the woman who fell asleep next to you for 3 decades was never the person you thought you'd married at all. If you're still with me, friend, and you want more stories like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because it really does help an old man out. Thank you, truly. Now, here's something nobody warns you about when your own wife sets you up. The evidence isn't the hard part. The hard part is realizing she was never distracted, never stressed, never going through some phase you didn't understand. She was working the entire time, and you were just the raw material. I need you to understand where my head was at this point. It had been 5 days since Marcus texted me about that hatch. 5 days since 2 officers crouched in my crawl space, looking at me like a man who needed watching. 5 days since Detective Pruitt started appearing. Not always with a reason, sometimes just parked across the street in an unmarked sedan, like I wouldn't notice a stranger's car sitting in front of my mailbox for 2 hours. I noticed. I'm 64, not senile. Marilyn flew home from Sacramento the day after the garage incident. I hadn't told her everything over the phone, just that something strange had happened and she needed to come back. When she walked through our front door, she looked exactly the way a frightened wife is supposed to look. Wide eyes, both hands on my face, voice shaking. "Walt, what happened? Are you all right? And Lord help me, for almost an hour, I believed every word of it. She cried when I showed her the crawl space. Real tears, or close enough that I couldn't tell the difference, and I'm still not sure there is one. She held onto my arm the whole time. I explained the hatch, the speaker, the flip phone. She said all the things a shocked wife should say. This is terrifying, Walt. Who would do this to us? Should we call a lawyer? That last question. I thought it was fear talking. I understand now it was planning. The storage unit cracked her performance, but only for a heartbeat. When Detective Pruitt came back 4 days later and told us both about Unit 212, I was watching Marilyn's face the whole time. Most people would have missed it. It lasted less than a second, a tiny freeze, like a video buffering before it catches back up to itself. Then the tears returned right on schedule. Somebody is framing my husband, she said, reaching across the table for my hand. This is obviously a setup. Walter has never rented a storage unit in his life. Detective Pruitt looked at her, then at me, then back at her. Mrs. Adkins, she said slowly, how do you know that? So, certainly, Marilyn didn't hesitate. Because I know my husband. I replayed that sentence probably 300 times over the following 2 days. She didn't say he'd never do something like that. She didn't say it was impossible. She said she knew me, which kept the whole thing about certainty rather than character. It was a lawyer's answer wearing a wife's voice. Here's where things get more deliberate, friend. Stick with me. I have an old army buddy named Harlan Voss, no relation to Karen. As it turned out, just a strange twist of fate we'd laugh about later, though nobody was laughing yet. Harlan spent 22 years doing fraud investigation for an insurance company before he retired, which means he spent his whole professional life learning how people construct lies that hold their shape under pressure. I called him on day 6 and told him everything. He was quiet on the phone for a long stretch. Walt, he finally said, how many joint accounts do you and Marilyn have? 2, I said, checking and savings. Who handles them? I opened my mouth and then just stopped. Marilyn handled them. Had since our 5th year of marriage. Back when I told her paperwork bored me half to death and she offered to take it over. I hadn't given it a second thought since. Why would I? Bills got paid. Savings grew. Everything looked fine on the surface. Pull every statement you can find, Harlan said. Go back at least 6 years. I pulled 8. What I found didn't jump off the page at me. That was the cleverness of it. No dramatic withdrawals, no wire transfers to some island bank. Instead, small, patient, almost invisible movements. $80 here, routed to an account I didn't recognize. A recurring charge to a business name I'd never heard of. A cash withdrawal every couple of months, never quite enough to trigger a bank's attention. Over 8 years, it totaled a little over $54,000, moved so carefully I never once noticed a ripple. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning staring at those numbers, and I felt a specific kind of cold settle into my chest. Not fear. Something closer to scale. Because this wasn't a decision Marilyn made after some rough year or a hard season in our marriage. The first strange transaction was dated 16 months after our wedding day. She'd started this while we were still hanging curtains in our first house together. Harlan drove over the next morning. We spread everything across my dining room table: bank records, the storage unit paperwork, the police report, a timeline I'd sketched out on a legal pad at 2 a.m. He studied it all, without saying much, which is Harlan's way of being respectful about the fact that what he's looking at is worse than you think it is. The storage unit, he said eventually. Walk me through your phone the week it got rented. What do you mean? Where was your phone the night before that rental agreement got signed? I thought about it. Nightstand. I charge it there every night. And Marilyn? Same room, obviously. We share a bedroom. I'd shared that bedroom with her for 31 years and never once thought of my own charging phone as a weak point in anything. She'd taken it while I slept. Driven across town. Signed the rental agreement in my name, using my signature the way you'd hum a song you'd heard 10,000 times. Paid cash, set the whole thing up, and been back under the covers before my alarm ever went off. The garage door, Harlan said quietly. You called Higgins from your cell? We don't even have a landline anymore. Pull your outgoing call log for that day. I already knew, somewhere underneath, what I was going to find before I found it. The call to Higgins' garage door had gone out from my number at 9:14 in the morning. I'd been at the hardware store by 8:30. I had a receipt with a timestamp to prove it. Marilyn had made that call, from my phone, taken again, or maybe never fully given back, to schedule a repairman she knew would end up staring at a fresh-cut hatch, hearing a recorded scratching sound, and texting me straight into a panic. She'd built the entire opening act herself. "This isn't something you throw together in a few months, Walt," Harlan said, and his voice dropped into the register men use right before they say something they wish they didn't have to. "Financial movement going back 8 years. Your name on accounts you never opened. Your signature on a lease you never signed. That takes practice. Repetition." He paused. "She didn't just study you. She became fluent in you." I stood up and walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The flower beds Marilyn had planted 3 summers back, the ones I'd watered faithfully every single evening because she told me the roots needed consistency. I'd been watering her garden while she built my coffin underneath it. At 64 years old, I had exactly 1 move left, and I hadn't told Harlan about it yet because it only worked if Marilyn believed, fully and completely, that her plan had already succeeded. She needed to think she'd won. I needed her comfortable, just a little while longer. There's a particular quiet that settles over a man once he stops being afraid and starts being deliberate. I found that quiet on a Sunday morning, sitting at my table with cold coffee and 8 years of bank statements, and I made a decision I have not lost 1 hour of sleep over since. I did not call a lawyer. I did not confront Marilyn. I did not walk back into Detective Pruitt's office with everything Harlan and I had put together, because evidence only carries weight if the man presenting it still has any credibility left. And right now, as far as Tulsa PD was concerned, I was a 64-year-old man whose signature was sitting on a storage unit that held a missing woman's belongings. Marilyn had accounted for that too. Of course she had. So I did the one thing she hadn't planned for. I became a man she couldn't read anymore. First, I called my younger brother, Elton. Elton Adkins, retired Army National Guard, lives out in Broken Arrow now. The kind of man who owns 4 rifles legally, talks in short sentences, and hasn't panicked about anything since roughly 1987. I drove out to see him on a Tuesday, told Marilyn I needed a few days to clear my head, and watched her face rearrange itself into the exact expression of a patient, understanding wife. "Take whatever time you need, honey," she said. I nearly smiled. At Elton's kitchen table, over black coffee and his wife's leftover cornbread, I laid it all out. The hatch, the storage unit, the bank statements, the phone records, the photograph tucked behind our wedding pictures. Elton listened without a single interruption, which from him is roughly equivalent to another man weeping. When I finished, he sat quiet for a long moment. "You said she's got somebody she talks to," he said. "Somebody close." "Her friend Denise," I said. "Denise Farrow. They've known each other since before Marilyn and I even met. Talk on the phone constantly, sometimes twice a week. In person or by phone? Both. Denise is up in Kansas City, comes down maybe 3-4 times a year. When she visits, they take these long walks around the block, or sit out on the back porch with the door shut." Elton nodded slowly. "How long you had a baby monitor sitting on that back porch?" I looked at him. "Elton, I haven't." "I know you haven't," he said, completely straight-faced. "But you're fixing to. Here's something I want to be honest about, friend. I am not a vengeful man by nature. I coached Little League for 11 years. I've never thrown a punch outside of a boxing gym in my whole life. I'm the guy at the family reunion who makes sure everybody's got a drink and remembers who's allergic to shellfish. Revenge was never part of my original makeup, but I am a patient man, and it turns out patience is the only currency that matters when you're playing a long game." Elton ordered a small audio monitor online, paid cash at a shipping store, had it sent to a P.O. box, the kind of operational habit that decades in the Guard apparently just wire permanently into a man. I drove home Thursday, told Marilyn I was feeling steadier, let her hug me in the doorway while I counted her heartbeat against my chest and felt precisely nothing. That was the strangest part. Not anger. Not grief. Just a clean, cold clarity. I planted the monitor on a Saturday afternoon while Marilyn was out getting her hair done, tucked behind a ceramic planter on the back porch that neither of us had moved in 15 years. Took me maybe 5 minutes. I drove out to Elton's that evening, confirmed the audio was coming through clean on his laptop, and drove home in time for supper. Marilyn made pot roast, asked if I was starting to feel like myself again. Getting there, I told her. She smiled and topped off my iced tea. I waited 17 days. 17 days of being Walter Adkins, devoted husband, cooperative person of interest, casual subject of an ongoing missing persons case. 17 days answering Detective Pruitt's questions patiently, letting Marilyn squeeze my hand in front of her, watching my wife perform worry so convincingly that even I had moments, brief, disorienting moments, where I wondered if grief had made me imagine this whole thing. Then, on a Wednesday evening, in the third week, Denise Farrow came down for a visit. I made myself scarce, told Marilyn I was heading over to Harlan's for the evening, kissed her cheek, and drove exactly 6 blocks before pulling over and opening my phone. The audio came through clear as a bell. They talked for nearly half an hour about nothing much. Denise's job, a nephew's graduation, a barbecue place in Kansas City worth the drive. I nearly convinced myself I'd wired a listening device onto my own porch out of pure paranoia and Harlan's fraud investigator instincts talking me into it. Then Marilyn's voice shifted. Subtle, like somebody changing key on a piano. Same hands, same instrument, entirely different song. She got quieter, more exact. All the warmth drained right out of her voice. Slow and complete, like water leaving a bathtub. He hasn't got the faintest idea, Marilyn said. Denise was quiet a second. You're sure? He's out there mowing the lawn, coaching those kids on Wednesdays. That detective's got him half convinced he's a suspect, and Walt's just Walt. He's exactly who he's always been. Doesn't see past what's directly in front of him. Never has. And the woman? Karen? Safe, Marilyn said. She agreed to stay gone for 60 days. She's out in Las Vegas. I paid her enough that she won't say a word. By the time the 60 days is up, Walt's going to be too buried in this to matter anymore. A pause. Marilyn. Denise's voice had gone careful, almost hesitant. What actually happens to him? He becomes the answer to a question the police are already asking, Marilyn said. Simple as reading a grocery list. They've already got his signature, his name, his money trail. All I have to do now is let it finish building on its own. Give it a few more weeks and it won't need me involved at all anymore. It'll just have its own weight. And where will you be? Somewhere with an ocean, Marilyn said. And then she laughed, easy and warm and completely unguarded. The laugh of a woman watching a plan click perfectly into place. I sat in my truck 6 blocks from my own house, listening to my wife laugh about the architecture of my ruin, and that same cold quiet settled over me again, still and complete. I didn't call Elton. I didn't call Harlan. I didn't call Detective Pruitt. Not yet. I want to tell you about Karen Voss, friend, because she matters in all this. 2 days after Denise's visit, I hired a retired Tulsa PD detective named Gus Delgado, a friend of Harlan's, the kind of man whose whole personality is a filing cabinet with legs. I gave Gus one job: find Karen Voss. It took him 5 days. She was in Las Vegas exactly like Marilyn said, staying at a mid-tier hotel off the strip, paying cash, checked in under a name that wasn't quite hers. Gus got photographs, got her on record, got a notarized statement from a woman who, it turned out, hadn't fully understood the legal weight of what she'd agreed to, and was considerably less relaxed about the arrangement. Once a retired detective was sitting across from her in a hotel lobby, explaining what the word accessory actually meant in a court of law. Karen Voss wasn't a criminal, friend. She was a woman who needed money badly enough to make a catastrophic decision. She told Gus everything: how Marilyn found her, what she'd been promised, how she'd been coached on staying gone for exactly 60 days. She signed the statement with a trembling hand and cried for a good 10 minutes afterward. Gus sat with her the whole time, because underneath that filing cabinet exterior, the man is decent to his core. I now had a recorded conversation from my own back porch and a signed statement from a missing woman who was never actually missing. 2 things Marilyn had no idea existed. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't march straight into Tulsa PD and hand it all over. Because evidence delivered by a suspect, however clean, gets swallowed into a long, grinding legal process. And during that process, Marilyn would lawyer up, go silent, and spend the next year and a half dismantling everything I'd built from the other side of a courtroom. She was good at dismantling things. I understood that now better than anyone, so I did something quieter instead. On a Sunday evening, while Marilyn sat out on that same back porch with a mystery novel and her black tea, I sat at the kitchen table and sent 2 files from an email address she'd never seen to a number she wouldn't recognize. An audio clip and a photograph, Karen Voss, alive and smiling in Las Vegas, holding up that morning's newspaper. No message attached. No explanation. I shut the laptop, rinsed my mug, and went up to bed. She came upstairs about half an hour later. I watched through barely opened eyes as she stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, phone lit up in her hand, completely, utterly still. In 31 years, I had never once seen Marilyn Adkins stand that still. She was always moving, adjusting, managing something. She stood in that doorway like a woman who'd heard a sound she couldn't place. Good. The next morning I drove down to Detective Pruitt's office and set Gus Delgado's full report on her desk, the statement, the photographs, the bank records, the call logs, all of it organized neatly in a manila folder, because I've always been a thorough man. She read for nearly 10 minutes without lifting her eyes. "Mr. Adkins," she finally said. "Rhonda," I said, "I think we both already know I never rented that storage unit." She looked at me a long moment, then reached for her phone. Marilyn was arrested on a Thursday morning. 11 charges, including conspiracy and obstruction. She was walked out of our house in handcuffs right around 9 a.m., cold enough that morning to see your own breath hanging in the air. I watched the whole thing from the front porch. She turned and looked back at me once, just once, as the officers guided her toward the patrol car, and for the first time in 34 years, I couldn't read a single thing behind her eyes. Couldn't find the calculation. Couldn't locate the woman who had studied me like a forger studies somebody else's handwriting. She just looked at me, and I nodded. Because here's the thing Marilyn never once understood about me, the one miscalculation sitting right at the center of her whole careful plan. She'd spent years studying what I did, where I went, how I signed my name, how I slept at night. She never once bothered studying what I was actually thinking. At 64, I'm not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't slam doors on my way out of a room. I don't need to have the last word. I only needed the last move. She spent 15 years, maybe longer, building a cage for me one quiet transaction at a time. I built her one in 17 days. Somewhere out there tonight, Marilyn Adkins is looking over her shoulder for a ghost she made herself, a husband she was certain she'd already won, a man she underestimated right up until the moment it mattered most. She knew my signature better than I did. She never once knew my spine. And that, friend, was always going to be her only mistake. If this story meant something to you, do an old man a kindness and hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me down in the comments what you'd have done in my shoes. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you next time. Claude responded, "Real trust isn't built on never asking questions, it's built on paying attention. Real trust isn't built on never asking questions, it's built on paying attention." Walter didn't win because he was angry. He won because he stayed calm, stayed patient, and quietly noticed what didn't add up. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is trust our gut, keep our composure under pressure, and remember that clarity always beats panic in the end. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its little life lesson stayed with you all the same.